What are some things you are concerned about when you see someone's labs with all these different people that you have coming to you? What makes you
So
say, hold up?
on the DEXA scan, the three things that get me phosphorylated, which is just a fancy word of saying wound up, is bone mineral density problems, high VAT, and then the fourth thing we look at is muscle mass specifically. So we look at metrics of muscle mass, and we look at two, but and these are a little complicated to explain technically, but conceptually they're not. We just want to know how much muscle you have normalized to your height, and there's two ways to do that. The first is a metric called ALMI, appendicular lean mass index. So think about appendicular, appendices, arms and legs. You take the total amount of muscle on the arms and legs in kilograms, divide by height in meters squared. So you get a number that's might be as low as 5, which would be really, really low, and might be as high as 10 or 11. That would be really high. That gives you a sense of what the range is. But we put these on a chart and it will spit it out. So I wouldn't expect you and you to be the same because you have different heights. You're male, you're female. You're probably about the same age, but all those things factor in. What I care about is percentile. How do you stack up? And so I just looked at a new patient who's not starting yet. It's a patient who's going to be coming on. I just got this person's DEXA scan today. The ALMI is below the 5th percentile for this individual. So body fat is low, VAT is low. I don't remember what the bone density was, but I think it was average. But the fact that muscle mass is below the 5th percentile is a 4-alarm fire in my book.
So is that somebody that's either under eating or undernourished or maybe not working out enough, or what?
Yeah, it's all of the above. So not eating enough, not training enough. And let's be clear, genes play a role here. This is a person who just, is of diminutive stature and has, this is a person who would never probably ever be able to amount to having an ALMI at the 95th percentile. But this is a person who could get to the 30th or 40th percentile over 5 years.
So when you see that, and in your book, you mentioned this like 4 horsemen of death, which is, tell me if I'm wrong here, heart disease, cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and type 2 diabetes or related metabolic dysfunction.
All the metabolic diseases.
So when you see that reading, what of those are you concerned that leads to?
So one thing I haven't seen in this patient yet, because they haven't started yet, and this is the first piece of data I haven't seen other markers of their metabolic health.
Okay.
And I haven't seen their family history, and I haven't seen any of their chemistry. So I don't know yet. But what I do know is people with lower muscle mass have higher all-cause mortality across the board.
On every one of those kind of functions.
And anything that can kill you, which is those things, plus falling, plus kidney disease, everything that can kill you, when your muscle mass is that low. So to put this another way, if you look at a study, and I think I cited this study in the book, if you took a bunch of roughly 70-year-olds and you broke them down into quadrants of like how much muscle mass they had by this metric, this ALMI, and you compare the top 25% to the bottom 25%, and you follow them for 15 years, so 70 years old and on, the people in the top 25%, 80% of them are going to be alive in 15 years.
Interesting.
In the bottom, half of them will be. So a big difference in mortality.
Okay, so maybe staying on the muscle theme, I was going to talk about it later, but Lauren and I, we weightlift rather frequently. She just started, 2 years ago now, and for the first time ever. And I read in your book that, and tell me if I'm wrong here, that you are now maybe considering this kind of exercise maybe more important than diet and nutrition, muscle building. Would you agree with that, or is it just all part of one component? If you had to pick like one thing.
Yeah, so I think what I would say, so if you asked me this question 10 years ago, of all those levers, which one's the most important? I would have probably said nutrition. But I think today, that if I look at the data more objectively, I think that having a high VO2 max, so having really high cardiorespiratory fitness and having high strength and muscle mass is more strongly associated with a longer life than anything else, including having a really good diet. And by the way, this is not just me saying I speculate on this. The data are really clear if you look at the hazard ratios associated with the absence of those things. Does that make sense? So in other words, the easiest way to look at this is to say, what is the risk of having type 2 diabetes, which you could argue is the most extreme form of metabolic dysfunction associated with, being the most overweight or all these other things. You could look at the hazard ratio of obesity. So you look at the hazard ratio, meaning the increase in the risk of death from all of the things that go wrong when nutrition is off the rails, and compare that to the hazard ratio for death when you have low muscle mass, low strength, and or low VO2 max. And by the way, just for giggles, compare that to the hazard ratio of smoking, and compare that to the hazard ratio of high blood pressure and all these other things. And those numbers are really clear. So for example, you take a person who smokes and someone who doesn't smoke. So
cigarettes.
Yeah. So same in all ways. And we're just going to look forward and predict their death. The smoker in any given year has a 40% higher chance of dying.
Wow.
From all causes. Okay. What about type 2 diabetes? It's about the same. Maybe a little bit higher. So take a person with type 2 diabetes, compare them to an age, sex matched, everything matched, on the way, same thing. It's about 1.5 to 1.4 to 1.5, which means 40 to 50% greater chance of death. So those are big numbers. Now look at it with low muscle mass and low strength. So you take someone with high muscle mass and strength, low muscle mass and strength, but otherwise they're the same. The difference is 150%.
Holy shit. Wow.
Now do it for very high cardiorespiratory fitness and very low cardiorespiratory fitness. So top 25% to bottom 25%, it's 175% difference. 175% difference, not 75%.
So that is more, so on the scheme of the percentages, that is the bigger thing, is the cardiovascular fitness.
The cardiorespiratory fitness, the strength and muscle mass are so much more important simply on the basis of these types of observations, which is when you compare good and bad on those fronts, the gap is 3 times larger than when you do it on the nutrition front.